Happy New Year, and 2025 has come to a close, and we're looking forward to 2026. So when you're listening to this, it's going to be into the new year. And Happy New Year there, Lalo, and hope you and your family have had a great holiday and looking forward to a new year.
Yeah, same here. Thank you, Andy, and Happy New Year to you as well. And yeah, exactly. We're looking forward to another exciting. Funny how it hasn't even been a year since Trump got elected. It feels like 4 years already, but
Yep,
but that's cool though. I mean, it's what they call job security, right, in our business. So,
definitely. Definitely. Well, listen, we're going to have a great discussion today, folks. We're going to talk about, if I can talk anyway, about some statistical data and, the implications of things. We're bringing on somebody that is a good friend, and this is somebody I met several years back at the NAFTZ conference, I think is the first time we met. Ken Roberts, this is somebody that I'm telling you, he'll forget more than I'm going to get to learn. He is definitely the sharpest tool in the shed as far as things go. But folks, let me tell you, Ken is one of these guys that when he talks, you better be listening, because even though I may not necessarily agree with his analysis at times, he and I always have a great discussion. And Lalo's going to be in here with some things, trying to keep things even keeled, because Lalo's so good. Lalo does his homework. Me, I'm off the fly, right? But Ken, welcome to our show. It is such a pleasure and honor to have you on the show.
I'm glad to be here, and I have forgotten a whole lot, to your point. Yeah.
Yes. And before we get started, one of the things that since we're going to talk, everybody, just so everybody understands and knows this, it's all about the data and the numbers. Ken is like a genius at that. He has so much stuff. You can find him all over the internet if you Google him, and you'll see that he has quite a few things on Forbes. And of course, through his business and his website. You know how they say, Andy, what is it, the saying, and Ken will probably know it, liars use numbers, but numbers never lie, I guess. And so Ken is going to show us all the numbers, and we'll put it all together with data and trade and everything. But thank you, Ken, for putting this together. I was looking at all your prep work that you sent us beforehand. This is like a PhD class in trade data.
Well, we actually say our data-driven storytelling made simple is what we try to do, because it can get, we start with the big spreadsheets, they're big and they're wide and they're long, and then we try to sort of make some sense of it. Yeah, so I'll give your listeners a little bit of background. So my company, WorldCity, we have a site called ustradenumbers.com, and we take data that Customs and Border Protection gives to Census and Census puts out to the public, and we make it usable for people for airports and seaports and border crossings. We do it on countries. We do it on exports and imports. And for those of you in the know, and I think your audience is, we use 4-digit harmonized tariff code for all our exports and imports. That's what you'll see in a minute when I do some screen shares. But we have hundreds of thousands of pages on our website updated every month. And I'll just show you a few of them to sort of talk about what 2025 looked like. Now, keep in mind, the data lags behind. I know it's January 1st now, but the data lags behind a little bit, and it lags behind even further when you have a government shutdown that lasts 60 days. So the data that I'll be showing you today is through September. But what we can do is we can start talking about what are sort of the big issues that have gone on, what has changed in the trade data. To your point, Lalo, about job security under the Trump administration, I started writing a column for Forbes.com, their website, 5 times a month on trade when Trump got elected, because the editors at Forbes said, we think there's going to be more discussion of trade than we're used to. And so I did it through the first 4 years of his administration. I did it through the 4 years of Biden's administration as well, but there wasn't as much to talk about then. And right now I'm back at it again, and there's just a lot of great stuff we can talk about. So I'm going to pop up a screen share here, and we'll just run through some things so people can understand what I see going on with the data. Okay, so
while you're gearing up for that, let me just say something to our listeners. This is a show that you definitely want to share the link with your upper management and all. This is going to be getting into some things for like strategic planning, some things that you need to listen to, look at what the statistics are telling you. You can come up with your different ideas of how to go forward with it. But this is going to be a great show to share with your upper management.
And in case you're wondering how to watch us, just tune into our YouTube channel. So it's at Simply Trade Pod. So that you'll find that on YouTube. So in case anybody's new to the show. You can also check our show notes, and it'll provide a link straight to that. So, okay, go ahead, Ken. Sorry.
Super. So this is what's called a tree map, and you'll see a number of these. This is the countries with which the United States trades, and the block. The bigger the block, the more trade they do. Mexico's in the number one slot there in the upper left. Mexico has been the top U.S. trade partner for the last 2 years, and will be again when the annual data for 2025 is released in February. Sometimes, usually early February, it might be pushed back a little bit. Canada, when I started doing this data, whatever quarter, hard to believe, by the way, the first quarter of the century is gone, huh? It's amazing.
Wow,
But
that's
anyway,
true.
I started doing this way back at the turn of the century, basically. And at that time, Canada was always number one.
Yes, it were.
Top export was always sort of Boeing jets, but aircraft. The top import was always oil, sometimes passenger vehicles, but almost always oil. About 2018, those four have never been number one since. It's been more movement than I've seen in the first 15 years, in the last handful of years. Mexico now number one, Canada number two, and China for the first time last year, will have proven to drop below 10% of U.S. trade for the first time in a couple of decades. So that trade war that Trump started in 2018 and Biden continued, and Trump is now continuing, has had a significant impact on the imports that we get in the United States that say made in China. There's some question, and I wrote a fourth column about this. There's some question of, is it really that we're not bringing more things from China? Is it just they're getting here through a third party like Vietnam and so forth? Germany, Taiwan, Japan, you can see. Vietnam is now number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Vietnam is the fastest growing U.S. trade partner over the last quarter century. Just phenomenal growth over that time.
What's surprising me is that Taiwan and Japan have been right there together, but Taiwan is now number 5. It surpassed Japan there a little bit on your stats.
And I'll tell you, I can tell you now why it is, or I can keep people on the edge of their seat and tell them a little bit later why Taiwan is so high now. So we'll keep them on the edge of their seats why that's happening, because there's something that's going on that in everybody's life these days that'll explain why Taiwan's there. So I'm going to switch now and go to, this is a quick look at the ports, and this is particularly interesting. In no year since I've been doing this have 2 airports been the top 2 slots.
Yeah. I noticed that, and I was looking at that going.
That's what I didn't mention. Always, every first of the month, top port forever was the Port of Los Angeles. I knew I'd left somebody out of that top 4. Port of Los Angeles was always number 1. They're now number 4.
Well, and again, this is one of those things where you're saying the 2 airports are number 1 and number 2 being Chicago and JFK. And obviously the increase with, as far as trade percentages there, Port of Laredo is understandable. And in LA dropping, I guess the ocean freight is dropped off some in
somewhat, but what's going on is and this ties into President Trump and ties into the economy, and we'll just switch over to the exports.
Yeah.
And let's look at, this is the current month, and look at the number. So number 1 is civilian aircraft. It looks like for the second year in a row, it dipped for quite a while after those 2 big Boeing crashes, which you may recall. And it dipped for a while, back on top again. Gold is number 2. This is now, I'm just on the month button here at the bottom. You can see, I'm going to switch to year to date. You'll see that it's going to drop a little bit. But what that tells you, I've got to click on the right place. I'm clicking on there you go. So gold drops now down to, where did we go to? 5. So in the month of September, as you guys have seen, the price of gold has gone through the roof.
Yes.
Funny, not a funny story, not that funny at all, but I lost my wedding band a few months ago, and I was going to buy a replacement. And I went, and gold had at that point gone to $3,000 an ounce. I said, I'm going to wait till it comes down a little bit. That's ridiculous what they want for a ring. Because I'd had the ring for 37 years, Well, I'm not expecting to pay that price, but I was paying. Gold's at $4,500 an ounce now.
Yes.
I still got the ring. So anyway, in the month of September, gold shot up again. So it was the number 2 export briefly. But gasoline, oil, and natural gas, the second, third, and fourth exports from the United States are energy related. This happened. Why? This happened because of fracking. The United States developed this great ability to bring oil and gas and natural gas out of the ground. a lot of it in Texas, but also in other places, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, I guess. At the same time, early in relatively, I guess, midway through the Obama administration, we had a ban on, largely a ban on exporting oil since the Arab oil embargo in 1973. We sort of dropped that and started exporting oil at the same time, and now you can see the results. We have a surplus of gasoline exports and imports. We have a surplus for natural gas, a big one, and we're not far from a surplus in oil. So that notion of energy independence is a very real thing. Low value shipments is one. I'll just mix this red one here in the second column. That is largely that de minimis stuff you guys talk about. Those are things that are less than, and you guys help me out if I'm right, less than $800, I believe is the figure, right?
Well, that would be as far as de minimis into the U.S., but that
Exports is
low
lower.
value is also, that would be considered your e-commerce. That's the
Yes, correct. That's what I mean.
the
This is all
online.
e-commerce stuff.
Yeah.
So when I first started looking at this data 15, 18 years ago, 20 years ago, it wasn't much, but it kept rising because initially it was FedEx, UPS, DHL kind of overnight packages. Well, it has continued to rise, and now it is largely an e-commerce category. So we'll look quickly at the imports. Let me scroll that one
Well,
up a little
also
bit.
another note that I want to make on that is my understanding is that even though the de minimis affects everything that comes into the United States for shipments coming into the United States, some of the data that I have seen has actually affected a lot of our exports going out because
Correct.
for the simple reason that when and if we have to or the vendor has to fulfill a return order, they are paying for the duties coming back into the United States for that product for an exchange or a return, and where before it was duty free. So now it's costing them way more to get to return that product back. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. I think you're correct on that one. Sure. And the other thing that's worth noting is that I don't know if you've experienced it. When I do online shopping now, things are sometimes not available or not available for a week or longer. And I think that ties into this as well.
Yeah.
So it's definitely meant to use. We'll switch over to imports now. And I'm on the monthly one here because I wanted to show you what number one is: computers. And this, again, we're at the 4-digit code. This includes things like servers. And that's where we're going to get back to the Taiwan thing. What's going on is all these servers are coming to this country to serve the AI boom, right? To make all these Perplexity and Claude and ChatGPT work, they need big computing power, lots of servers, and so they're pouring into this country. A great deal of them through El Paso area where you are, Lalo, as well as other places. And so that's and a lot of them are coming through Taiwan, and they're coming into Chicago, which is the airport as well. And so forth. So I showed this because number two is insulin, hormones, and steroids.
That
Even
one
though,
shocked me. I was like, I wonder what do you have any more
yes,
detail there?
this is Ozempic, and those kind of drugs are not technically hormones or steroids or insulin, but I'm
Okay.
convinced that's what's getting put in that category because they behave like, I guess they behave like hormones. I guess is that what they do?
So
Or
probably
steroids?
but you said at the 4-digit level, that's probably where it's starting. So and then
Yeah,
it probably
yeah. If we go
categorizes
down,
even
go down to 10, you can learn a lot
right,
more.
right.
Yeah, sure. But if this was on the month, so this is the month of September. If you switch to year to date, I keep doing it on the wrong screen there. You switch to year to date, it'll change. And then you got computers, passenger vehicles, oil. So oil is still number three. And then cell phones. I remember, I think it was 10 or so years ago for the first time cell phones passed computers. Because as we know, we all have them. Everybody has them. And so suddenly cell phones and the parts were selling more than computers were. Now computers, because of that, is back on top. Plasma vaccines and blood, that's another sort of healthcare category. That's a lot of blood fractions often used in cancer patients and things like that. Let's see what else I got. So let's I'll pull up something on gold here. We were talking about gold and how it had risen. This is exports of gold from the United States, looking just at the month of September for the last, whatever that is, 12 or 13 years. And look at 25.
Unbelievable.
Okay. A big chunk of that is price related as opposed to quantity. A big chunk. And I'll switch to year to date as well.
For those listening, is that it's like 4.5 times more in
Yeah.
2025 than what it seems to be almost the average here.
Yeah. It's huge. And I'll switch to year to date and it's still a pretty big jump. Now I'm going to switch to tonnage and I can pretty safely do this. And I'll tell you why I say safely in a minute. But when I switch to tonnage, changes.
Yes. All right. But well,
It's a
it appears to
value
be
story to some extent, right?
the
Yeah.
second largest tonnage
Now,
in the last years, I guess.
yeah,
15 years.
this is by year to date, but by the month, remember when I was showing the gold earlier, I said the month of September took a big jump. You can see it here, even in tonnage, it's by far the biggest for the month of September. Okay.
It's interesting.
Now, a lot of
What's
what
driving that? Obviously jewelry and stuff. Last minute manufacturing of jewelry or what?
it's the term you'll hear starting to hear it used now is debasement. And what gold tends to go up when people are nervous about the economy. And, you know, President Trump's policies can be disruptive, right? He likes shaking things up a little bit. And
Yeah.
so that makes some people nervous. You saw right after Liberation Day, April 2nd, the bond market took a step back and said, wait a minute. And then the stock market did the same, since obviously gone way up. But when people are nervous, they look for gold. And there's also a question, is there any threat to the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world? And so
Right.
all these things are playing into it. It's not Gold has limited use actually in the real world.
Right.
There's some jewelry, but and now the other metals, platinum and silver, are also going through the roof, obviously. But gold, they have uses, they have uses, but gold has limited actual industrial use. Yeah.
Yeah. The obviously Russia, China, North Korea, several countries are trying to move away from the US dollar. Is that, international
And
exchange?
foreign banks are, uh, the I should say the national banks of foreign countries are storing gold as well.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, and then coming back, so it appears to be a bit more of a investment type of
Yes,
scenario there.
correct. It's a hedge.
It's
It's a
a
hedge.
hedge. Okay.
Yep. So speaking of China, I write and spend a lot of time thinking about China's U.S. trade. Here's U.S. trade with China. They're our number 3 ranked trade partner in the month of September. And this just gives you an example of the kind of data I have. So we can see that big drop there in September. It's a pretty significant drop in the month of September. This is just China with the U.S. And year to date, still a very big drop.
That is. That's a huge drop.
Yeah. So remember I said that China's trade was going to drop below 10% of the total for U.S.
Hmm.
by
So it
year's end.
appears that people are moving away from China, not necessarily to Mexico, but to
No,
what it appears is diversifying their sources. Like you said earlier, you made a comment. It may be that folks are moving to, let's say, Vietnam or Malaysia or some of those places that are, when you start looking at it, is you still have China goods that are being assembled into products, which still gets into the
rules of origin.
the rules of origin and the forced labor prevention type stuff. Where I know there was seizures that we were done. We talked about this, Lalo, I think a year ago, that we were talking about statistics from 2 years ago that were coming in, and the seizures. There was like I'll say $1 billion worth of, or maybe 100 billion. There was a big amount seized, and of that, I think it was 1 billion, and like 375 million of it was from Vietnam, and another 300 or so odd million was from Malaysia, and they were China origin
Yep.
goods in there. So I don't know if
Yeah, I was
that
gonna say if
trend.
you haven't had an expert on to talk about rules of origin, I think that'll be something you'll hear more about in 2026. Trump had mentioned at one point, they're aware of it. The administration is very aware that this is what's going on. And he said that's where he said he wanted to put a 40% tariff on anybody he catches violating rules of origin. Because I don't know if I have one of my columns that I'll show you in a minute or not, but I've written about the fact that to your point, imports to the U.S. from Vietnam and Japan and Taiwan and Cambodia and India, those are all up. The U.S. deficit has not fallen. Here, this is a chart that shows you the percentage of China's trade that is a U.S. exports. It's about 39%. But China, I want you to keep in mind that 25, 26% that's China. Let me see if there's anything else. Here's where China trades. Obviously, no surprises here. But so there's Port of Los Angeles. Let's switch to year to date here. It's just a little more helpful.
So
Port of Los
that
Angeles,
would
there's
be mostly ocean freight into
ocean.
LA from China.
Yep.
And
then
then the
this is air
Chicago
freight.
obviously is air
Well,
cargo.
Yeah, so it goes back and forth as you see. There's airport, seaport, 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 airport, on it, on and on. If you go to tonnage, it's going to be all seaports, obviously.
And while you're doing that, folks,
Yeah.
what we're talking about, we're getting into some statistic data. Here's what you need to look at. You need to have some folks on your staff that digest this, and it takes time to get up to speed with this. But what we're talking about here is like routing guides. This would come into the point of what mode of transportation and what ports they're using, and you look at that compared to your own distribution centers or how you're getting raw goods into your manufacturing sites and whatnot. So this is kind of some of that stuff to look at and say, okay, if my source is China, what ports are they utilizing, and does that meet with what I'm looking at, or whatever country? The data you've got, Ken, again, this is phenomenal stuff.
So here, this is the imports from China, because people pay a lot of attention to this. So we'll go back to 2024, about 11.5, almost 11.5, 12% of all cell phones and related equipment came from China.
Mm-hmm.
Year to date, it's down to 9%. And for the month of September, it's back up again. But for year to date, it dropped down below 9%. A lot of, as you may recall, you read in the news that Apple had moved trying to build a lot of manufacturing in India.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a Forbes chart I'll show you in a minute that proves that to be the case. Toys, big import. This is one that has not moved out of China. China accounts for about 75% of all in the category, this 4-digit category, which is sort of toys, children's bicycles, and games. And that's one President Trump made his famous comment about, children don't need $30; they can have $1 or $2, right? And so we were very offended about that comment. But I can tell you, when I look at the trade deficit stories that I write about, when you look at our deficit, I mean, if you want to solve the deficit, you got to wonder, why do we have? Guess how many of these self-storage sites we have in the country?
I've seen, I don't know, but I can tell you this. They're everywhere. I mean, you go down, there's new ones being popped up all the time.
52,000.
Oh my God.
Wow.
There's 6 square feet of storage for every American in this country. Stuff that we can't fit into our houses.
And so you put it in the store. All right. So then the other question would be,
So you want to get rid of the deficit?
what's the
so much
occupancy rate? Huh? Yeah, you got more stuff. Let me go store it and pay for more.
Quit buying so much stuff. We can take care of the deficit real fast,
So what about
the deficit is just a sign of how successful we are as a country.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what's the occupancy rate of that? Do you know?
85%.
My gosh.
Jeez.
Last time
I need
checked.
to get into the storage business.
I had a friend of mine's father, a guy who worked for me years ago. He said his father was going to get into this thing called the self-storage business. I'm like, what? What kind of business is that? Who stores stuff? And this was, I don't know, 20 years ago. He knew something I didn't know, clearly. I always marvel at the stories that I think are really bad ideas and they just explode, Like, who needs that? And man, you can't drive a mile from where you live without seeing one, right? I want to find the soybean page for you because you'll find that to be interesting. If I can spell soybean right. It's a prerequisite. You know how to spell to use our site successfully.
There you go.
I'm in all caps, but it should be able to handle my inability to get out of all caps. I've decided that we need to take the all cap button off my keyboards. Don't you think? Let's see. So we want to soybean imports. There we go. Nope. There we go.
There you go.
No, it's open here. So while this opens, it might open. Oh, it's going to open pretty well. While it loads, I'll show you this. So this is my Forbes column.
Mm-hmm.
I write all these stories. You can see them all here, but I'll just point out a few. One that just went live a few days ago. Mexico's deficit with China U.S. deficit with Mexico was larger than the deficit with China 3 of the last 5 months. Now, this is truly remarkable. First of all, Mexico remember I told you going back 15 years, it was always the same. Canada was number one for this, Boeing aircraft for this, oil for this, Port of Los Angeles for this. Well, since about 2018 or 2020, it's been going back and forth between China, Canada, and Mexico. Mexico now this will be the third year when the annual data is released. Mexico will be number one for total trade. It'll be the first year ever they're number one for total trade, total exports, and total imports.
Wow.
And no country has done that since, I think it was 2006 with Canada. It's been a while. It's been a long time since one country had all three, the trifecta, right? But now what's happened is all those exports that were going, all those imports we were getting from China that are now coming from other places has lowered the deficit the United States has with China. But at the same time, it's increased what we have with Mexico because of energy, because of automotive, because of a lot of different things, because of computers, a lot of different things. So this graph shows the deficit with Mexico and how it's grown. So in 2018, U.S. deficit with China was 5 times larger than any other country. And that other country was at the time Mexico, was number 2. Right now, that deficit's about 12% larger than Mexico. So if you think this USMCA review coming up this year, it's going to be really, really important because there's a big difference between the relationship we have with China and Mexico in trade. Remember that little pie chart, that little donut I showed you that showed about 25% of all U.S. trade with China was a U.S. export. With Mexico,
Right.
it's just under 40%. I think it's 38% with Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So they get a lot of things from us. It's hard to just say we're going to, like with China, you can just say, look, we're going to stiff arm you because you need to get your imports in here more than we need to get our exports to you. But let me see if the soybean pages come up yet. So here we go. This is where you want to see. So for the month, so here's year to date, a drop. I wonder why it didn't quite make sense. So here's the month down.
Now we look at, okay.
So this is sort of the Biden years. And I guess this would have been technically 20
the last year of Trump.
Last year, Trump, they went way up because I guess at that point, they had a sense that they thought he might not win or something. I don't know.
Well, let me say this, though. If I'm not mistaken, there was a big trade deal.
Oh, yeah, he probably said, we'll buy a bunch of your.
And he was pushing the deal to say, you need to be buying the
soybeans,
soybeans and all that. And I think
they kind of went up. Now they've gone back down again. Let's now go. And there you can see the drop. And there you can see how soybeans are very seasonal, as I think you guys know. So it's basically, I'm going to oversimplify, basically October through about February, but with some September and some March into April. But then it shifts down to Brazil, largely. So let's see what we can do for 2024. I think they finished it. Okay, 51% last year, right?
This is from the U.S. market of soybeans.
China.
So China bought almost 52%.
Yep.
Then Mexico, Indonesia.
That was last year.
Okay.
Last year.
Last year.
And then year to date, look for that blue square, still at 23% year to date. Now let's look at the month. Remember, we're looking for that nice blue color. It's gone. It's gone. 3 months in a row. Now they did it in the slow summer months, but in July, August, and September, 0 soybean exports from the U.S. These are the slow months, so it's not as critical.
To China, you say?
To China. So what I'm waiting to see is when the October data is released, because there's been some notion that, okay, we'll buy some soybeans from you. But the fear some of the farmers have is that, can Brazil meet their demand? And I don't think Brazil can. I think they're going to have to come back to the U.S. But anyway, so this is the column I wrote. Let me see what this one is. This one, yeah. So after 34 years, China won't rank first for U.S. exports. Mexico will. That's the story I wrote recently. There's another one. Here's the one about the soybeans. That's shutting off the valve. Here's one about China. Look at that. 8 of top 10 U.S. imports from China in 2018 are down more than 50%. And that's, in case they can't read it, that's going to be cell phones, computers, computer parts, furniture and parts.
But that's where we're saying is that when you're writing that, is U.S. companies then are sourcing from other countries or domestically, obviously,
Yep.
but from other countries.
Yep.
But that was in 2018. You're saying
From 2018
from
compared to
2018.
2018, they're down 50% from their 2018 was the start of the trade war, and it was also the peak of the U.S. trade deficit with China. I think it was
Okay,
800 billion that year. It's a big, big
right.
number. Whatever that
Yes,
could have been that big. Yeah.
it was huge.
And
There's no question.
here's where I talk about this is the rules of origin stuff. I wrote this back months. I wrote this in July. Their trade plummeted from 18% to 6%, and I said, is it Trump tariffs or is it trickery? Because the deficit's not falling. Those things that we were importing from China are still being imported. They're just coming from somewhere else. I mean, we could say, oh, it could be that they've just actually moved their facilities to Vietnam and so forth, and they're using Vietnam workers, and it's Vietnamese parts, and it's final assembly in Vietnam. It's all in the up and up. But I think there's a lot of people who don't think that's what's going on.
Well, let me say this though. Here again, when we're talking about the trade deficit, the U.S. is obviously buying more goods from other countries and consuming more goods from other
Yes,
countries than we are exporting.
correct.
And all right, so here's one of the things that I keep looking at
And have
is
for 30 years. Yeah.
yeah, and it has. It's just we're the largest economy in the world, and I mean when you look at the overall GDP of the U.S. and the percent of imports, it's still a small percentage. So the U.S. domestic produces a whole lot. So really, the U.S. consumes a huge amount. All right, saying all that, the one thing though, when it comes to the trade deficit, the one thing that I guess I look at is, yeah, you want low cost imports or low cost goods, but you got to be careful. You don't want to have low cost imports at the sacrifice of US exports. That's where I have the issue,
Right.
is that
Right.
a lot of these countries, and I love this article that you are highlighting right now that talks about, and it's really phenomenal. It talks about the last 5 presidents, every last one of them have wanted to reduce that trade deficit, and yet not a one of them has really been successful.
Yeah.
There's been different percentages. Some have grown,
Yeah.
some have
Yeah.
done it.
Yeah.
But my point is this, and then I'm gonna let you get in here, is I don't want low cost imports at the sacrifice of US exports. Here's where I go is that the tariff barriers or the non-tariff trade barriers for US goods, it sacrifices US jobs. That's where I'm going with this, is that, hey, we all need to compete. Stop wanting, everybody wants access to the US market. I say this over and over again. All these countries want access to the US market, but then the US, when we try and reciprocate, going, we want access to your market, there are all these different barriers that come up, including China. China's the second largest economy in the world, and they put up those trade barriers, not just for the US, but everybody else. And I have an issue with that with the World Trade Organization. So that's one of the things there that gets me.
Yeah. No, I mean, China's the biggest piece of this whole puzzle. When in 2001, China was admitted to the WTO, Deng was their president, and everybody was hopeful because he looked like he was moving in the right direction. And along
Mhm.
comes this guy named Xi Jinping, and he has just gone totally the opposite direction.
Yep.
And so, I mean, right now, a lot of the things that were coming from China that are coming to the U.S. are going to Europe, and Europe's now starting to complain about having cheap Chinese imports dumped on them.
Mhm.
So I think you're going to see the pressure is going to be significant, and something will give at some point. When, I don't know. China's a patient country, and he's very much in charge of his country,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, this deficit problem is not something that is new. We do now have, I think this will be the $5th trillion deficit in a row. It's a pretty big number, but it's not huge. I mean, it's not huge when you consider the size of the U.S. economy. And the thing I also look at is what percentage of U.S. trade is an export versus an import. And over the last 30 years, it's down a little bit now, but it's ranged from more or less 38 to 42 cents is an export. It doesn't move much because
Mhm.
as our imports have swelled, so have our exports, generally speaking. They tend to move somewhat in tandem. Sometimes exports go a little bit faster than imports, but imports are just so much bigger.
Ken,
Yeah.
Ken,
Yes.
how do you see the data or the numbers changing? Let's assume we hear early in the next week or so, we hear from the Supreme Court a decision against Trump. How, I mean, they say you can't turn a cargo ship that quickly. I mean, same thing with trade. I'm assuming, right? I mean, we're not going to all of a sudden see a whole bunch of stuff coming in from China. I mean, I guess primarily also because there's other programs that the administration can use to tariff items coming into U.S. But my feeling is that that's going to take a lot longer because it may have to go through the formal channels, through Congress getting approved and stuff like that, versus just with a tweet. You know what I'm saying? And so, what are your feelings, or what do you think? I mean, going now that we're in 2026, going forward that way. But do you feel like then suddenly we're going to start seeing a lot more imports from China because there's less tariffs coming in, and you know what I mean? Like, do you feel that might actually change the trade with? I know Mexico's been on top for 3 years, but I mean, is that going to shift something suddenly in favor of China?
I don't think so. And I'll tell you, there's a few things that are important to understand. The rate of tariff on is it all imports, and what percentage of the tariff revenue is that equal to of the total? In March, the month before the Liberation Day, April 2nd, where he held the poster up, was 2.5%. So all imports we get in this country now, a good bit of that is because Mexico and Canada largely bring imports in at zero, right?
Which is I mean, there's talk about, well, there's
USMCA, NAFTA, and all that.
25% on Canada. However, those are goods that don't qualify for the
Correct.
USMCA trade agreement,
So what this
which
did
is
do, and
very
I'm going to sidestep, and you got to help me get back to where I was going if I lose my sight here, but I'm not as good at the weed as the president is getting back. So with Canada and Mexico, what I found in looking at the data, a lot of times they looked at, okay, do I want to go ahead and make this USMCA compliant or NAFTA compliant for that USMCA compliant, or I just want to import pay the 2.5%, whatever the number is. And they would just pay it because it just wouldn't work the paperwork. Well, now when he said it's to be 25% on certain things, unless they're compliant, I think you're going to see that start to go up. That'll be one change. This column, I put this column back up is, and get back to what I was going to say, people have this notion that tariffs have been really, really high. So the tariff, as I said, was 2.5% as a percentage of all U.S. imports. The tariffs duties raised by the Treasury, it's now at about 10%. Now that's 4 times increase, but it's none of this 40%, 50. It's not huge, huge, huge numbers yet. So I think that's one reason you're not seeing the inflation. It's another reason that the refunds might not be that big amount of money. I mean, it's a $240 billion. It's not nothing. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's, in a multi-trillion-dollar economy, it's not big. I think he can still keep those tariffs in place on China separate. I don't remember the original tariffs he put on China, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong here, were not using this IEPA, which is the one that's before the Supreme Court now. They were in place during his first administration. Biden
yes,
kept at
yes.
25 plus 10 or something, as I recall. Then he went real big on China. He is. Somebody says something the wrong way, pushes it the wrong way, he'll hit back, man. So he did. He started talking about 140%, stuff like that. It never went that big, but there are additional tariffs on China that have been part of maybe the IEP or something else. But China will still have significant tariffs, and whatever supply chains have been moved or whatever final assembly has been moved, I'm not sure there's going to be much incentive to move it back. I don't. I would be very surprised to see. I think that decoupling term you heard talk about with U.S. and China, to some extent, it's happened. It's happened.
So, out of all of this, what would be your takeaways here of what you've seen thus far? We're still in a kind of wait and see to see what happens in 26 to as far as the policies. Do they actually, do you think that, well, I guess, forgive me for rambling here. The policies and the trade negotiations going on is one thing. the statistics are going to show the intent of the policies being put forward going to realize into actual good results or bad results, I guess that's the big thing here, right?
I think the two big stories that may play into what you're asking is what the Supreme Court decides on these IEEPA tariffs. And he took it to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis, and they accepted it on an emergency basis.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I think, in September, October, November. Where's the emergency, right? They haven't decided. So I think what they're saying is we're gonna let it be and see what happens, right? That's all I can figure out. So I'm not a Supreme Court expert or watcher. The other one is I think Mexico's President Sheinbaum has been much more adroit at working with Trump than her counterpart in Canada,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and it's going to get heated though because again, as I've talked about, number one trade partner, number one export partner, number one import partner. I'd be surprised it's possible in 26 they could become our largest deficit partner. That's a lot of cards in one hand. Now, the immigration problem, the border issue seems to largely it's abated, I think, right? It's done. It seems to be. The fentanyl thing is not done. So Mexico is by far the most important relationship this country has from an economic point of view. Mexico is not a threat militarily to us. They're not China and they're not Russia, right? But they are super important to this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be interested to see how both Trump and Sheinbaum play this thing. I wish I had a better view on that. I don't.
I listen, your information, I love how you display it. It is so fantastic. And with all of that being said, folks, I'm telling you, this is something where if you are looking at going out and expanding your markets into other countries, looking at sourcing, changing your sources from other countries into the US, that's one of the things that you need to look at strategically. And again, the ports volumes and things that's where you get into the routing guys saying, well, how does this apply to me? And you have to break it down and spend some time with it. But man, your data is so fantastic.
Yeah, I should mention that a number of our port clients take our data for their port and make it available to the public on their sites. We do that for 10 to 12 sites, Port of Los Angeles, Dallas, Fort Worth International Airport, Miami International Airport, Rado, Eagle Pass FAR. I'm going to leave somebody out in Houston International Airport, Port of Hueneme, a bunch of these ports around the country have our data on their site, updated automatically every month, which is kind of cool too.
All right, folks. Well, listen, Ken, thank you so much for this. Lalo, anything you want to wrap up here with us?
No, just want to thank Ken for coming on, and it's probably going to be something that maybe we'll reach out back to you every quarter or so just to update the numbers and see how that's going and see how we can work it into the episodes that we publish. So that would be great. We'll definitely stay in touch. Maybe we'll also convince Tatiana to come on since she seems to have some good stuff here on the background as well. But anyway, we'll figure something out and see if we can get you all to make this regular and see how much data we can grab from there. So
I appreciate it. You guys are doing a great job, and what you do is important work for the trade and logistics community in the country and around the world. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah.
Folks, Happy New Year again. We're looking forward to 2026 and hopefully the opportunities will come out. And with that, again, Lalo, anything last from there?
No, we're good. We're good. Thank you all. And we have some really good stuff coming out this month. So stay tuned.